Hi, welcome to Exchange Rates. We're going to have a sequence of videos trying to understand the different aspects of exchange rates. First thing that I want to do is to concentrate on what we call the exchange rate regime. This is typically how central banks work. So assume that we are going to be in Mexico, and for the sake of the argument of these classes, let's assume that we always be Mexico. And the central bank in Mexico has a currency that is the currency of circulation in Mexico, the peso, and they have reserves and they have other type of assets that, as we have discussed in the babysitter cooperative, these are things that matter for central banking policy. Now the central bank will tend to make an announcement about how they want to deal with the fluctuation of the exchange rate peso to the US dollar. And in that statements about how it's going to govern that relationship, we call that exchange rate regimes. There are many different ways in which you can organize those exchange rate regimes. I like to divide the exchange rate regimes in three groups. One is called floating rates, where the exchange rate between the peso and the dollar is allowed to fluctuate. Then I want to separate two types of fixed regimes. One that is called just fixed rates, where the exchange rate between the peso and the dollar is either not allowed to move, or when it moves in a predictable manner, versus strong fixes, which means that actually they're going to be fixed and they will not move at all. Now, you want to ask, well, what is a favorite one? Actually, there's no favorite one. Countries go through these different regimes as they go along. There are times in which strong fixes are better than floating rates, and there are times where floating rates are better than strong fixes. I don't think that one regime is good for every country, and I don't think that one country should have only one exchange rate regime. I think this depends on the circumstances. So all of these guys have advantages and disadvantages, and what I want to do is to explain a little bit today how they differ, and then I will, in the next video, I will go more, I will pay more attention to the things that are about the workings of the central bank in the balance sheet. For the moment, is the intuition. So when you have a flexible rate or a floating rate, what you want is to allow the dollar peso to move with market forces. That's kind of the idea. Now you will allow, for example, a very independent floating means that the central bank will allow this number to be anything. Inflation targeting is a form of extreme flexibility on that exchange rate. So if the exchange rate between pesos and dollars go from 4 to 20, the central bank will do nothing. They will say that's fine, that's whatever the market forces are. A managed floating implies that you will allow some fluctuation, but not too much. So that kind of the central bank will say, oh, well, I would like to allow volatility, but not a lot. Let me explain the strong fixes, which are on the other hand, or the other extreme. One is to have one non-separate legal tender. That means that it's like equivalent to say that Mexico doesn't have a currency, that they use the US dollars. By the way, there are many countries that do that. Salvador, Ecuador, for example, are countries that decided to eliminate their domestic currency and adopt the US dollar as the currency of circulation. But this also happens within the euro. I mean, Italy doesn't have a currency by itself. Greece doesn't have a currency for themselves. All of these countries, they use a currency of somebody else, which in this case will be the European Central Bank. So in fact, when you ask which one is the most common one, right now in the world, we have more strong fixes than purely flexibles. I just want to clarify that in the world right now, we kind of have more on the left side. A currency board is a particular form of fixing. It's used in Hong Kong today. It was very successful in Argentina for several years to control the inflation rate. So currency boards are a form of very strong fixes. These has very strict legal requirements about what the central bank can do. The fixed rates in the middle, they allow some fluctuation, but it's kind of in a predictable manner. So for example, fixed pegs is that the exchange rate will be fixed. That will be the case between Saudi Arabia and the United States. Actually, all the Middle Eastern countries and the US have kind of fixed rates. And there's a promise. There's no legal restriction. The central bank could, in principle, change that. They just don't change it for convenience. They keep it as is. A target zone is one in which you decide the range that you will allow the exchange rate to fluctuate, and you allow them to move within that totally freely. But when you get to the borders or the boundaries, that's when you said, well, that's it. That's the maximum devaluation and the maximum appreciation. Crawling pegs will be one in which I have a rate today and I know what the rate will be tomorrow. This will be, for example, let's devalue the currency by 5 cents a day. So at some point in time, maybe Mexico had a currency 10 pesos per dollar, and you said, well, and I will allow for every day to devalue by 1 cent. So today is 10, tomorrow will be 10.01, 10.02, 10.03, 10.04, and so on. So crawling pegs allow some flexibility. You are allowing some depreciation to happen in the currency in a predictable manner, in a very controlled manner. So the regimes play different roles. And the best way to understand that is the aspect of flexibility versus credibility. When you have flexible rates, or all the floating rates, what the economy has is a lot of flexibility. The exchange rate can be any number. So any shock that hits the economy will allow, I am going to allow the market to deal with that shock and allow prices to go up and down without any restrictions. That's more or less what we try to do in the stock market. Whatever happens to the stock of a firm, we allow them to move. However, most of you also know that a stock market has something that is called circuit breakers, that when the volatility is extreme, they will stop trading and try to figure out if there's information that had to be transmitted to the market that somehow was forgotten or it was not previously announced. Or maybe there's nothing wrong. They will actually ask the company, is there something that you need to say publicly? The company will say no, and then they will continue trading. But they stop trading for a while. You don't want to trade under panic. But what that means is that flexible rate allows you that flexibility. The problem is that flexibility can be abused, and therefore you lose credibility. On the other hand, when you have a very strong fix, like for example, no legal tender, well, we know then what is the value of the currency in El Salvador. It's $1. And we know the value and the currency in Italy. It doesn't matter what happened politically in Italy, the currency in Italy is €1. And it's not protected by the Italian government per se, it might be protected by the European Central Bank that responds to many other governments. So the political arrangement implies that one single country doesn't have the impact to change the views of the central bank. And therefore the central bank can perform their activities without regards of what happened to every one of the member nations. So when Greece had a problem, it was the central bank what decided, but it was not the decision of Greece to devalue or not. That was not a decision. Maybe Greece wanted a devaluation in the middle of the crisis, but it's actually the decision of the central bank whether or not to perform that and to what extent they will perform that and which tools they will do that. So the exchange rate between Greece and Germany and Italy and France and Spain is fixed, is at 1, and they don't have a legal tender, and therefore it doesn't matter what the shocks are, they have to be different ways to deal with the shocks across these nations. And the same happened in the United States across the states. So the exchange rate between California and Texas is 1. Doesn't matter what happened to Texas or what happens to California. We have fires in California. That's a bad thing that happens to California. California would like to devalue the currency. And the reason why you would like to do that is to be more competitive internationally, given that you are receiving a massive shock. Well, California would love to do that, but that's not the decision of California. It's the decision of the Federal Reserve in Washington. And they respond to the whole nation shocks, not to one particular state. Doesn't matter how important or how big that state is. So truly, what happens with these currencies is that depending on the regime, I either buy credibility, and I buy credibility, the stronger the fix, the more credible it is, okay? Or I buy flexibility, which means the more floating it is, the more flexible it will be. And this is what I think is the important trade-off. There are moments in which we want to buy flexibility. So after COVID, we would love to have a lot of flexibility. After the European financial crisis in 2009, maybe some countries wanted to buy flexibility. But other countries might want to buy credibility. Or in fact, the same country at a different point in time might want to buy credibility. So in 1999, Greece wanted to purchase credibility, but by 2008, maybe they want to purchase flexibility. And that's why it implies that countries are moving from one regime to the other. And it's very typical that that happens. See you in the next video.